Case 1. The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye is Toni Morrison's first novel, published in 1970, and the reason it has spent decades near the top of America's most challenged list is that it is a book about an 11-year-old girl who is sexually assaulted by her own father, becomes pregnant with his child, and loses her mind. Pecola Breedlove lives in Lorain, Ohio in 1941, and she has absorbed every message her country has sent her about who is beautiful, so she prays every night for blue eyes, convinced that if she had them, her parents would stop fighting, her teachers would look at her, and the world would rearrange itself into something bearable. Morrison surrounds that prayer with the machinery that produced it, and the most uncomfortable part of that book is what she does with her father, because Charlie Breedlove is not written as a monster who wandered in from outside. Morrison gives him a full history, including the night as a teenager when he was discovered by white men during his first sexual experience and forced to continue at gunpoint while they stood over him with flashlights and laughed. And the novel's argument is that this humiliation did not stay inside Charlie, it moved down through him and came out years later against his daughter. Pecola is assaulted twice. The baby is born early and dies. She then goes to a local fraud who calls himself a spiritual healer, a man who is himself a predator targeting young girls, and he tricks her into poisoning a dog and tells her the blue eyes have been granted. And the novel ends with Pecola insane, holding conversations with a friend who does not exist, admiring eyes she does not have. Morrison's own position, stated in an afterword, was that she wanted to show how completely a child could be destroyed, and that readers who find the book unbearable are having the correct reaction to the thing itself, rather than to her decision to write it down. Case 2. Beloved. Beloved is Morrison's 1987 novel, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. It is regularly called the greatest American novel of the last 50 years, and it opens with a woman who has cut her own baby daughter's throat with a handsaw. It is built on the real case of Margaret Garner, who escaped slavery in Kentucky in 1856 and crossed the frozen Ohio River into Cincinnati. And when the slave catchers arrived at the house to drag her family back under the Fugitive Slave Act, she killed her 2-year-old rather than let her be returned, and was trying to kill her other children when she was stopped. In the novel, that woman is Sethe, and the reason she does it is laid out slowly across the whole book. At the plantation they still politely call Sweet Home, a new owner arrives who measures the enslaved people with a tape and records their animal characteristics in a notebook. And while Sethe is pregnant, his nephews hold her down and sexually assault her, and when she reports it to the mistress of the house, they whip her so severely that the scar tissue across her back grows into the shape of a tree. That is the arithmetic behind the handsaw, and Morrison's point is that a mother killing her child was, under those specific conditions, an act of love, which is a sentence the reader spends 300 pages being forced to accept. Years later, a young woman with no history walks out of the water and into the house calling herself Beloved, which is the single word Sethe could not afford on the headstone. And she moves in, takes over, and slowly consumes her mother alive. The dedication at the front of the book is 3 words and a number, 60 million and more, and it is there before the story begins. It has been challenged for violence, for racial content, and for its depictions of sexual assault, and it became a live political issue in the 2021 Virginia governor's race. Case 3. Lolita. Lolita is Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel, and the thing to be completely clear about is what it describes, which is a middle-aged predator who spends 2 years repeatedly abusing a 12-year-old girl while driving her around the United States. Humbert Humbert narrates the entire book himself from a prison cell awaiting trial, and he is erudite, funny, self-pitying, and utterly convinced that what happened was a love story in which he was the injured party. He rents a room in a home of a widow named Charlotte Hayes specifically because he has seen her daughter, Dolores. He marries Charlotte to gain control of the child, and when Charlotte was killed by a car after discovering his diary, he collects the girl from summer camp, tells her that her mother is ill, and takes her on the road. The travel is not sightseeing, it is method, because a man moving a child through motels and diners across a dozen states is a man nobody has time to ask questions about. And he controls her with money, with the threat of a reformatory if she reports him, and with the fact that she now has no living relative on Earth. What makes the book genuinely dangerous is the prose, because it is some of the most beautiful English ever written, and it is doing that beautiful work in the service of a man describing his crimes as poetry, and Nabokov built it that way deliberately as a trap. Dolores herself barely gets to speak in her own story, and the handful of moments where her real experience punches through Humbert's narration, including the line where she calls what he did murder, are the parts that stay with the readers. Every American publisher refused it, so it appeared in Paris in 1955 through a press that mainly printed pornography. It was banned in France, Britain, and elsewhere, and when the United States finally allowed it in 1958, it sold 100,000 copies in 3 weeks. Case 4. Sold. Sold is a 2006 novel by Patricia McCormick. It was a finalist for the National Book Award, and it was the single most challenged book in America in 2025, according to the American Library Association. It follows Lakshmi, a 13-year-old girl from a mountain village in Nepal whose family has nothing and whose stepfather gambles away what little arrives, and who is told she is going to the city to work as a maid so she can send money home. What actually happens is that her stepfather sells her. She is handed down a chain of traffickers who each take their cut, walked across the border into India, and delivered to a brothel in Kolkata run by a woman named Mumtaz, who informs her that she now owes a debt covering her transport, her food, her clothing, and her bed, and that she may leave the moment it is paid, which is a sum constructed so it can never be paid. When Lakshmi refuses, she is starved, beaten, drugged, and repeatedly sexually exploited until refusing stops being something she is capable of, and the book stays with her through all of it. McCormick wrote it in extremely short chapters, some only 3 or 4 lines long, and that fracturing is deliberate because it produces a mind that has learned to record the world in pieces in order to survive it. She researched the book by traveling through Nepal and India, interviewing survivors and the people who recover them, and the defense her supporters make is the obvious one, which is that a book about children being sold is supposed to be intolerable, and that finding it too disturbing to keep on a shelf is a statement about the reader rather than about the accuracy of the book. Case 5. All Boys Aren't Blue. All Boys Aren't Blue is a 2020 memoir by George M. Johnson about growing up black and queer in New Jersey and Virginia, written as a series of essays addressed to younger readers, and it has been one of the most banned books in the United States every year since 2021. Most of it is not what the fight is about. Most of it is a grandmother who provided the safety nothing else did, the specific violence of black masculinity as it gets enforced on a child who does not fit it, being beaten up at 5 years old for the way he acted, and the long process of arriving at an identity. The bans are driven by 2 passages. In the first, Johnson describes being sexually abused at 13 by an older cousin, written plainly and without ambiguity about what it was. In the second, Johnson describes a consensual sexual encounter with a male partner as a young adult, and that passage is explicit. Those pages are why the book has been pulled from school libraries in dozens of districts, and why several school boards forwarded it to prosecutors and sheriff's offices asking whether distributing it constituted a crime, though no charges resulted. The arguments on both sides are made sincerely. Those seeking removal say a book with a graphically described sexual encounter does not belong in a middle or high school library, regardless of everything else in it, and that judging age appropriateness is precisely what boards and parents are for. Those defending it say the abuse passage is exactly the kind of account a young reader in the same situation needs in order to name what happened to them, that the consensual passage is brief and not written to arouse, and that books about black and queer lives are being pulled at a rate wildly out of proportion to their presence on the shelves. Case 6. Genderqueer. Genderqueer is a 2019 graphic memoir by Maya Kobabe, who uses the pronouns e, em, and er, and it is the book that turned American school board meetings into national news. It was the 3rd most challenged book in the country in 2025, its 5th appearance on that list, and it held the #1 position for several years running. The memoir itself is quiet and often mundane, covering an awkward childhood, a horror of puberty, a long confusion about what he actually was, the discomfort of being addressed as a woman, and eventually landing on non-binary as the answer. It was written for adults and young adults, not for children. The controversy comes down to roughly 4 pages, which depict self-pleasure, a sexual fantasy that Kobabe illustrates rather than describes in prose, an excruciating gynecological exam, and a scene involving an adult toy that riffs on a passage from Plato. Those panels are the whole fight, and the reason this book rather than any other became the symbol is that images travel in a way paragraphs do not, because a drawing can be enlarged, printed, held up at a microphone during public comment, and broadcast on the evening news, which is exactly what happened. The wider picture is that the American Library Association tracked 4,235 individual titles challenged in 2025, the second highest number it has ever recorded, with 40% of them representing the lives of LGBTQ people or people of color. And it reported that 92% of challenges came from organized pressure groups and public officials, while individual parents accounted for under 3%. Those pushing for removals reject that framing entirely, arguing that organized advocacy is simply how citizens make themselves heard, that the ALA has an institutional stake in the numbers, and that the only real question is whether sexually explicit illustrations belong in a school building.